panel with a cat on a table, that's all it is. But then if you have a panel with the cat sitting on the ground next to the table, that's what it is. But once you put it together, nothing moves in between those panels, but the movement happens in the reader's own mind. The reader's own mind constructs a narrative based on their past experience and says the cat jumped off of the table. Or if you switch the order, oh, the cat climbed on top of the table. And that's what's really interesting to me, because it's not moving, it's not like cinema. The reader is making all that movement happen. And because so much of it takes place inside the reader's mind, the same reader could read the story differently at different places in their life. Some people will tell me they'll read Kabuki when they're in college, and they connect to it on one level, and they'll come back to it 5 or 10 years later, and they'll read it again with a different set of history to themselves, a different point of view, and they'll see different things in it. And that's one of the magical things that I enjoy about the medium.
What comics were you reading growing up, and who have been your main influences in comics?
When I was about 9 years old, I was at a friend's house and I stumbled upon this Daredevil comic that they had. And this was back when Frank Miller and Klaus Janson were doing Daredevil. And I was so I guess a lot of you are familiar with this.
Yes.
It was the cover, I think it was maybe issue 182. It was the cover with the Punisher is on the cover shooting Daredevil. And I was so young. And by the way, I grew up without a TV or without other, connections to the outside world in terms of comics or films or other things. So I had heard about superheroes and in their fancy outfits, but I saw this guy in here dressed up like a devil, and another guy with a skull in his chest, and it was like a hardcore crime story. He was killing criminals, and it was kind of more than I was prepared to process. And it was a very intense, very visceral crime story. But I felt an incredible impact from it. I remember feeling the impact from it. And I was fascinated by how it was told, and I wondered why it was so impactful to me. And then a few years later, just by accident, I stumbled upon the very next issue at a secondhand store. And now I was 12 or 13, and I picked up the book, and I could understand, I could see why it had such a visceral reaction to it. I could see first of all, I could process everything a lot better at that age that was happening in the story. But I could see that there was an incredible intelligence behind the design of the pages. I could see that the creators were using storytelling motifs such as the lighting, the shadow, the panel sizes, the panel movements, close-ups. All of these things were in service of the story, and they were using it to such incredible effect that then it made me very aware of the intelligence behind the story. And I had that feeling that they gave me from it, and I said, I want to make things like that. So I started researching the creators, who were Frank Miller and Klaus Janson, and I found an interview of them in a book called The Daredevil Chronicles. The interviewer was Peter Sanderson, and he was asking Frank and Klaus all of the ideas behind how they approached their comics, and they were telling, how all the thought that they put into the drawing of it and the composition of the panels, and that they were influenced by Will Eisner. So I heard about Will Eisner's comics and sequential art, and so I ordered that from the publisher through the mail, and I got that and I was very hungry to learn about, this is all like pre-internet, pre-email, so it was a completely different world. So I ordered things through the mail, and I just soaked it up and was just so fascinated with it.
Tell us a little bit about the story of Kabuki and what inspired you to write the story.
Well, I did Kabuki when I was in college, and I started college very young, and I wanted to do a comic that I could relate to and I could express myself with. But I was also, I wanted to tell very personal stories, but I was also a big fan of autobiographical comics. There were autobiographical comics like R. Crumb's books, or Harvey Picar's American Splendor, or Joe Matt's Peep Show, or Ivan Burnetti's Schizo. And these were guys who would write very brutally honest depictions of themselves and their own stories, and it was fascinating. I mean, it was so honest to the point that they would write about how they would write about something very personal, including other relationships, and that they had with coworkers and things in the book. And the next issue, they would talk about why they got fired because their coworkers complained to their boss about how they wrote about them in the book. So it would be impacting their life, but it was all true. But I was so young at the time, I didn't feel unself-conscious enough to do a fully autobiographical book. And I didn't even feel really fully formed as a human enough to feel like I could objectively do that. But I was also considerate that if I made a comic book with the main character, I was worried that if I made it, that the main character of the comic could, instead of being completely honest, objective approach, it could be interpreted as an idealized version of myself. So I thought, I'll do as many things differently as possible that'll create a veil and a distance from the characters and myself, so it won't feel like I'll feel unself-conscious enough to talk about it. So I made the main character a different gender, and I put the story in a different part of the world. And I was in college at the time. I was taking the Japanese language and history and mythology classes. So I had a lot of those archetypes and images that I could use as metaphors in the story, that I could tell personal stories, but through the metaphor of some of this Japanese mythology. And I like the idea that I could tell about personal things that were happening now, but if I said it in the ambiguous near future, I could kind of turn the volume up on things. I mean, I think all good sci-fi does this, where it gives you the option, if you say it's sci-fi or it's slightly in the future, you can talk about personal things, but you can kind of emphasize or exaggerate something so that the point is more obvious. And so I felt like that gave me kind of a mask to tell the story through. There's this quote, give a man a mask and he'll tell you the truth. I felt like having this character and the story, and through the kind of metaphor of kabuki, gave me a liberty and a freedom to express the story that just came to me without second guessing it too much. So I can look back now at that early volume 1 of the Kabuki Library Edition, and I can see that was me at a very young and formative time in my life, where I was working a lot of things out of my system, and I was dealing with the death of my mother and other things in my family, and just a variety of challenging things for me at that young age that I wasn't even completely conscious that I was putting into the story when I was doing it. But in retrospect, I can see all that very clearly. So comics kind of became for me kind of a laboratory to experiment and work things out, and kind of a playground to kind of make sense of everything else that was happening in my life.
Is there any particular reason why you were studying Japanese language?
Yeah, I didn't go to an art school. I went to a university. So I had a BFA in graphic design and a minor in literature, but we still had to satisfy a lot of general requirements, general studies. So I had a friend in my drawing class, in my painting class, named Takashi Hattori, who was from Japan. And through him, I was connected with the other Japanese students in the school and the international students there, which I think going to a university instead of a specialized art school was really helpful to me at that time in my young life, because it opened my world to so many other things outside of what my natural specific interests were at the time that I